War horns blared for days on the coast of the Firus Spit. Longboats packed with weapons ran low through the water and shuddered ashore. From them came fur-clad companies of Norskan Umgi, the folk of the northern borderlands, long since pledged into service with the Chaos gods. They were the second wave of the Chaos invasion, far more organized and well-armed than the near-feral beastmen who had collapsed against the walls of the Atalan Empire in the preceding weeks. Above their host flew pale two-headed wyverns, tamed guardians of distant glacial layers, gifted freezing breath and unnatural resilience by the gods they served. Amid the army lumbered mammoths, bred for their size over thousands of years, their tusks alone long enough to skewer 20 Dawi. The Umgi themselves were often more monster than man, taken far down the path of corruption by their rampage across the old world. This was to be the start of a fresh adventure of slaughter for them, but for a single issue. On a plain beside the old Bretonnian castle on the Spit sat Commander Skag Fierskir with the veteran Obsidian legionaries. The noise of the Norskan landing had afforded Fierskir time to bring his whole force from Alhaik Castle, numbering well over 1,000, most with years of experience. Seeing them, the Norskans could barely wait to attack, and thus, with discipline hardly better than the beasts that came before, they assaulted Fierskir's line with a wave of cawing warriors. They couldn't have known what manner of things would come soaring out of that Dawi formation. First it was the cannonballs, not so unfamiliar after a foray through the Empire of Man. Yet these shots hardly ever missed. Their leader, riding a chariot at the rear, was killed well before the fighting got started. Then came those ominous green streaks in the sky. The Skaven rockets travelled slowly but inevitably. Warp fire fell among the massed infantry, against which there was no defence. One of the wyverns angrily bit at a rocket flying close by, and at once its whole head melted away to smoking slop, falling aflame onto the hapless warriors below before the body crashed into the sand. These opening moments were dire enough. However, beyond these hurdles was the fierce shooting of the veteran legionaries. Not only were they backed up by Khazran's freshly deployed squads of rocketeers, but also by Oldor's Gatling gunners. They had only a few of these experimental pieces, and needed no more it seemed. The Norskan survivors were put down en masse. One of the wyverns flew high and soared down to terrorize the Dawi from above, and the mammoths seemed to shrug off even the exploding shot from the Dawi rifles, careening into the legionaries with tusks and trunks sweeping a path. This was the shock that had emptied battlefields of Imperial soldiers in the prior months. For the Dawi, to whom the beasts appeared even larger, it was a moment for calm consideration of one's target. The wyvern was stung by shots from all around, and when it tried to take flight, its wings were torn by chains of shot from the Gatling guns. It lost its lift and plunged into the mess of the Norskan rear, where at that time more warriors were arriving from the ships to join the battle, only to see that their initial waves were strewn around the field, hardly any close to the Dawi line. The longer they waited, the closer the warp-fire rocketeers got to fastening their next salvo into their launchers. The rampaging mammoths were only stopped when the cannons fired into their sides at close range, rolling them over with a thud. Once they were injured, axe-wielding Dawi came and butchered them in the quite literal sense, dragging their harvest towards the castle before the day was even done. More Norskans came after that, being killed in simple and one-sided exchanges. Fierskir took his army to capture the valuable boats and eliminate stragglers, then returned to the castle before sundown, where feast preparations were already underway. In this way, the next great play by the Chaos Gods was batted aside with laughable ease. It was cause for cheer indeed. However, the aftermath brought some sobering insight into the situation in the wider world. The capture of the Norskan ships came alongside the rescue of many Old World slaves, and missives exchanged between the Norskans and the higher commanders in the Chaos armies. These all provided overwhelming testimony. The forces of chaos were victorious. The Empire of Man was gone. The steely body of the Chaos forces was at that time in Bretonnia and Astalia, pressing what was left of the humans up against the coast. Some of the slaves were strong in their conviction that a certain Réponse de Lyoness's counterattack was going to turn the tables. Captured Norscan survivors sneered news to the contrary. There was news too, at least, of the true situation in the Karazhan Corps. Predictably, it had lasted longer. It was said only now to be in the process of falling. The dragon ogre Kolek Sunita, first among the beasts of chaos, led herds of his kin to stalk the mountains. Denied the surface, it was only a matter of time before the dwarfs found chaos digging down into their holds below. All this news found its way to Khemri, Oldor's headquarters at that time. "This is it, then, my lord," Story said grimly. "Your plan is coming along nicely. We're alive, the rest die. All that's left to decide is when to pop our heads out to see if the Chaos Gods got bored and phased back into their dens." "No more of that," Oldor scolded him. He was staring at the updated map of the destruction. It was mostly covered in black scribbles. It didn't even show the Western Hemisphere, though if it did, the damage would look quite similar. "You're letting your desire to see the Empire again fog up your goggles, Thane. There's no clean sweep to be had. If we go fight, we're not here, and the mountains fall same as the rest. If we stay, the mountains far away fall all the quicker. The only speck of justice is that we live to bear their grudges down to the Sproglets." "I can't help but notice you're missing something, Lord," Kazran said, making a show of folding his arms. "There's a couple of old sayings that come to mind with all this. You might have heard them. Dig deep and range far. And machines. Well, I've heard they do the work of many. Underway might be blocked, numbers might be precious. But isn't this the sort of thing we normally get you in to solve?" "I'm talking about real work, not magic, Crompson," Oldor grumbled. "Hardly. All land crawlers will plough the underways out the moment you ask. As for the numbers, well, we're not going to take many, are we? Repeaters and rockets. We can probably make a safe camp with 300 stout lads. Magic machines, magic weapons. Seems like the real work is just going to be convincing the old boys at home to actually leave their dinner tables. By Grungy and all, you've pushed your japes all this way, and here they are, the purest cart in the train," Story said. "My lord, if your good friend here isn't all bluster, there may be some merit in a rescue operation." "I'm not your friend too, Thane?" "Now that's an awfully political question, you mad oaf." "Mad enough to ask us to go out there. Feel the pull of chaos," Oldor mused. "Hardly a concern that, is it?" Kazran claimed. "You don't hear it, even now." "Hear what?" "Hear the binds, the clouds, all you've heard about. It's not just going to be an Umgi disease anymore. If we go out there, there's no telling what will wrap its tendrils around us." "I hear it. We shall endure it. Better us than another," Story said, looking Oldor in the eyes. Oldor slowly nodded. "We've come down this passage far, further than advised. But if we'd listened to advice, we might be dead already. As you said, Engineer, I hardly know if the king and his ilk will even let us save them, if we can actually make it. Suppose it's best we find out, eh?" "I'll order in the rockets," Kazran cheered. 1,000 ought to do. How much mass does chaos really have to throw at us? This and other questions were pinned on a new expedition, more far-ranging and more mechanized than any before. The task was sufficiently immense that it was the only preparation not attempted so far, to link the Atalan underway to that of the World's End Mountains. This would give the dwarves a direct, relatively safe route to escape their carracks. In the distant past, such routes had been in regular use. However, they passed through what was now the Badlands, Orc territory for millennia. The orcs didn't do the best job of maintaining the underway, suffice to say. In fact, they had actively torn parts of it down, to the extent they could. The first job then was to clear a route from the node already being built at Khemri all the way to the fringes of the surviving empire. 1,000-mile stretch at least, through territory now patrolled by the Beastmen, the orcs having been mostly slain and consumed. It was the end times for them too, after all. Khazran's boast that the mission could be completed with 300 Dawi fell a little short, although Oldor had become resolved to take it on all the same. 500 legionaries, 2 gyrocopters, 5 land crawlers, and another 500 engineers set out from Khemri with a sole engine caravan laden with tools and supplies trundling along behind them. The hatches and doors were closed. Atalan braced for whatever might come. The first few miles went well. The rune locks on the checkpoints at the edge of Araby's deserts were still working, allowing passage into the long abandoned tunnels to the north. In truth, they were not so derelict as to be completely useless. The gyrocopters scouted ahead, finding the passage regularly crossed by demolished pillars and occasionally littered with rockfall. Such obstacles were cleared away, and the convoy carried on. Their number slowly fell, as engineers were left in long empty way stations along the route. More rune-lock doors would allow them to seal sections of the route, lest beasts or chaos warriors make use of that highway to the Karak interiors. The loss of workers slowed progress as the weeks went by, but the land crawlers could be used to make a brute force path through debris in many cases. All they really needed was a route their vehicles could traverse back through, and that carts from the Karazhan Corps could use to escape. Inevitably, this activity attracted attention. In places, the underway was practically outdoors, running beneath open crevasses at the surface. Even with all the official Badlands entrances completely blocked, the beastmen on the surface figured out that they could scale down in places and harass the meaty delights creeping below. Although they regretted it. The soldiers in the convoy were the most elite of the elite, and the caravan vehicles had plenty of ammunition to spare. As such, the procession slaughtered its way on, the gyrocopters lifting some of the larger beast carcasses to mount as warning posts above the natural entrances. The glimpses of the surface this offered revealed the world chaos was creating. The hills were broken open, some freely spewing magma. The swamps and savannas of the Badlands were black and withered, swaying about in manic winds, carrying a thick, grainy fog. Checking the scenes daily as they progressed, the extent of the damage seemed to diminish. That could mean only one thing: they were nearing the untainted lands of the mighty Karazhan Corps. Indeed, the ashen air faded, feeling fresher and more familiar as morning progressed to dusk. They came to a closed rune door, and at last the convoy had to halt for good. Oldor shouted out for the door to be opened. Eyes were peering at them through slits in a passageway that ran above the grey gate. The doors remained closed throughout the night. At dawn, just as the Atalan expeditionaries were preparing to turn back and climb to the surface, the great stone slabs steadily parted. From behind them, where the underway was well lit and decorated with banners, came a gang of silver-armoured dwarfs. Some held a golden throne on their shoulders, atop which sat a resplendent, white-bearded lord. His bearers ferried him to meet the contrastingly grubby Oldor. "Who seeks entrance to the realm of Thorin Ironhammer?" the lord asked from up high. "Plenty more than we humble Dawi, lord," Oldor snappily replied. "And before we go on, I have to ask, Ironhammer's a prestigious name, yet I've nae heard of any Thorin holding it. Belagar, perhaps?" "As expected of traitors, you've hardly knowledge enough to get your bearings," Thorin scoffed. "You've come here, I presume, to put me in debt to you. Don't pretend you haven't heard about Karak 8 Peaks and Belagar. Even though that drama played out in your conspicuous absence, not that you and 500 Wanas would have made a single sod of difference there. Probably would have sided with chaos at the first opportunity. Such comments were incensing the Atalan column, although Oldor was serene in the face of it all. "Since you don't appear to be appraised of the situation yourself, Lord Ironhammer, allow me to offer you my own tale. We've dug you and yours a path to our well-provisioned carracks a month to our backs, and come now only to inquire as to what you'll be wanting for the feast on your arrival. As for the rest of the world, even you must have been willing to hear the odd fleeing Umgi, or the plight of the North. It's finished, Lord. It's all finished. It's you, me, and a few others. Gather all you can and join us. We'll keep chaos off your backs until the evacuation is complete. You can call us traitors until your beard's wound up around your feet, and you'll still be needing our help same as before. Sorry to be blunt. Such is the way and such are the times. What say you? 8 peaks will not fall to the likes of you, Jar in waiting. You banished yourself before. Well, consider it formally put to ink. You can go around us if you like. We'll handle our own affairs." Ironhammer's words were calmer than before, and he would not meet Oldor's iron gaze. The Dawi below the throne got the hint and carried their lord away. The rune doors scraped to a close again, amid uproar from the column. "All as feared, isn't it?" Story commented. Oldor let out a long breath. "Precisely why we're here. Getting yourself killed for a cause is one thing. Getting everything and the book burnt to smoke is another. Whatever we do, it won't matter what the kind Lord thinks, sooner or later." "Time to do this the old-fashioned way?" Khazran asked. Oldor nodded. A few days later, the column emerged from an underway exit, pushing the blocking debris before them. They were in the wastelands on the rim of the Badlands, a desert of thin, lifeless soil. The World's End Mountains staggered the horizon in the east. From there the convoy could march overland towards the mountain holds, steering around Ironhammer's domain to seek out the High King Thorgrim at Karazakarak. The plan changed quickly, though. The gyrocopters above reported a shadow sweeping across the brown fields ahead. A Dawi host was fleeing it, almost in contact, fragmenting and being consumed by the clouds at their heels. It was nothing less than a field army of the Chaos Gods, armed and armoured in all the corrupt fineries of elite troops. And those fleeing were led by none other than Dorin Ironhammer. No doubt he had known that this was his fate as he turned away the filthy outcasts at the gates a week prior. But he had underestimated the tenacity of the crusading engineers, a mistake even a dwarf was prone to make from time to time. Oldor's column formed up and beckoned the 8 Peaks warriors to approach and pass through. The half-mad retreat squirmed through the orderly rows of Golden Guard legionaries. The Gatling guns were loaded and the rockets were stacked in neat piles. The expedition tightened the clips on their beards and prepared to face a true army of chaos.